It was one of those nights when the studio lights shone bright and the audience buzzed with excitement. Everyone had been talking about this show for weeks, and the energy in the room was electric. People were laughing, whispering, and clapping even before the host appeared. It wasn't just another episode. It felt like something special was about to happen. The camera pans across the audience, capturing their smiles, their eager faces, the way they leaned forward in anticipation. You could almost feel the excitement in the air. The host walked in with his usual energy, waving at the audience, smiling widely, and throwing in a few jokes. His charm filled the room instantly, and the audience responded with loud applause and laughter. He had this way of making everyone feel included, even people watching from their homes. He knew how to create a connection, not just with his guests, but with everyone around. Tonight, though, there was a particular guest that made the air even more electric. The guest was a famous actor, someone people admired not just for his work on screen, but also for the calm, quiet way he carried himself off-screen. There was an aura of mystery around him, the kind that makes people lean in a little closer when he speaks, the kind that makes silence feel as powerful as words. As the host introduced the guest, the audience clapped and cheered, some even standing for a moment. Cameras zoomed in on the guest's face, showing a small, polite smile, a nod, and the way his eyes scanned the room with quiet attention. Unlike other celebrities who thrived on attention, he seemed at ease in a different way, comfortable but careful, aware of the spotlight but not drawn to it. The host made a few jokes about the guest's movies, the audience laughed, and the conversation flowed easily. For a few minutes, it was all laughter, smiles, and lighthearted chat. The host had a way of talking that made people open up without realizing it. He asked about the guest's recent work, about funny moments on set, and about small personal details that weren't too private but gave the audience a glimpse behind the scenes. The guest answered in his usual calm manner, adding small jokes and light comments here and there. The interaction was smooth, friendly, and natural, the kind that makes people at home feel like they are part of a conversation rather than just watching a show. But after a while, the tone began to shift, almost imperceptibly. The host, with his sharp wit and curiosity, started steering the conversation toward deeper subjects. He asked about what keeps the guest grounded in an industry that was often loud, chaotic, and overwhelming. He mentioned how some people find strength in certain beliefs, routines, or ways of seeing the world. The questions were framed with humor, but there was an edge of curiosity that hinted at a desire for something more personal. The guest paused for a moment, listening carefully, measuring his words before responding. The audience noticed it too. There was a subtle change in energy, a quiet pause in the laughter. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something a little different was about to unfold. The host asked another question, this time a little more pointed, trying to understand what drives the guest in life beyond his career. The guest smiled politely, gave a small laugh, but didn't answer directly. He was being careful, not because he didn't want to share, but because he had always been private about his personal beliefs. It wasn't that he had secrets. It was that he valued certain parts of his life as deeply personal, something sacred and separate from public attention. The host, noticing the pause, leaned in with his trademark grin, trying to lighten the mood with a joke, a playful nudge, or a reference to something from the guest's past work. The audience laughed at the joke, but there was a slight tension underneath the surface. People could feel the balance between humor and seriousness, between curiosity and respect. The guest responded with a small smile, acknowledging the joke, but keeping his answer neutral, a reminder that some topics were not for public debate. Even in these moments, the guest's calm presence commanded attention. There was no defensiveness, no irritation, just quiet confidence. He had a way of speaking or choosing not to speak that made people notice and think. The audience, and even the host, could feel that there was more behind the eyes than words alone could capture. It was a reminder that sometimes what is not said can be as powerful as what is said. The host tried another approach, using his wit to weave the question into the conversation naturally. He asked about moments of struggle or uncertainty and how the guest found strength to move forward. The question was gentle but persistent, meant to uncover something human and relatable. The guest listened carefully, his eyes thoughtful, his posture relaxed but intentional. For a moment there was silence, just him, just the host, and the audience waiting for a response. That pause itself felt meaningful, drawing everyone in closer, making them hold their breath in anticipation. Finally, the guest spoke. Not with drama, not with anger, but with calm, measured words. He explained that some things in life, especially deeply personal beliefs, were meant to be kept private. He didn't criticize anyone for asking. He didn't turn away from the question. Instead, he gently reminded everyone that some parts of life are sacred, not because they are mysterious or unimportant, but because they are deeply personal. The audience felt the weight of his words, a quiet respect settling over the room. Even the host, known for his quick comebacks and lively humor, paused. He smiled, nodded, and shifted the conversation back to lighter topics, respecting the guest's boundaries. The audience clapped softly, some murmuring in approval, realizing that they had witnessed a moment of quiet dignity, a reminder that celebrities, despite their fame, were human too. With their own private lives, their own sacred spaces, the rest of the interview continued smoothly, returning to laughter, jokes, and discussion of movies and projects. Yet the earlier moment lingered, not as tension, but as a shared understanding. Viewers at home, especially those who noticed the subtle shift, felt something meaningful. It wasn't just about the guest or the host. It was about respect, boundaries, and the quiet strength of being true to oneself in a world that constantly demands more. By the end of the segment, the audience left with more than entertainment. They carried a subtle lesson that sometimes silence is not avoidance and restraint is not weakness. Some things are simply too personal, too valuable, to be turned into public spectacle. And in that simple truth, there was a kind of beauty, a reminder that respect and understanding matter just as much as laughter and applause. The cameras cut away. The lights dimmed slightly, but the energy didn't fade. People continued talking in hushed tones, reflecting on what they had seen. The guest smiled politely one last time before leaving the stage, the host waving warmly. Backstage, there were quiet smiles, small nods of approval, and a sense of having witnessed something unique, a moment where words and silence combined to leave a lasting impression, even long after the show ended. Clips of the conversation would circulate online, shared by fans, commentators, and people who admired not just the guest's work, but his character. They spoke of a moment that was not flashy or dramatic, yet unforgettable. It was a reminder that real strength often lies in calmness, in choosing carefully what to reveal and what to keep sacred. And it all began on a stage filled with light, laughter, and the subtle power of human dignity. After the first part of the conversation, the audience was already leaning in, paying close attention to every word. The energy in the studio had shifted slightly. What began as a light-hearted, playful interview had taken a more thoughtful turn, and the people watching could feel it. It was no longer just about jokes or movie stories. It was about something deeper, something real that made everyone in the room pause for a moment. The host, known for his quick humor and curiosity, noticed this shift too. He smiled, keeping the mood light, but there was a subtle edge to his questions now. He had a way of guiding conversations, making them entertaining but also meaningful. And tonight, he seemed determined to explore what drove the guest, not just as an actor, but as a person. He asked about the moments when life seemed overwhelming, when expectations were high, and the pressures of fame felt heavy. He phrased the questions casually, with a laugh here and a playful gesture there, but beneath the surface. The questions were pointed, the guest listened quietly, nodding slightly, considering every word before responding. He had always been someone who measured his responses carefully. Unlike some celebrities who shared every detail of their personal life, he valued privacy. And his calm demeanor suggested that he had learned long ago how to navigate moments like this. The audience could sense that he was thoughtful, not evasive, and that every pause was intentional. The host, sensing the pause, leaned in a little closer. His smile still in place, but his curiosity obvious. He joked about how people often have small routines or habits that help them stay grounded, and he asked if the guest had anything like that. The guest gave a small smile, a quiet laugh, but he didn't give a direct answer. Instead, he spoke in a way that suggested some things were too personal to be shared openly. His voice was calm, steady, and measured, but there was a strength behind it that caught everyone's attention. The audience, at first, didn't know exactly how to react. There was a brief moment of silence, just long enough for people to notice that this was different from the usual playful chatter of a talk show. They weren't bored, they were intrigued. They leaned in, whispering to each other, wondering what the guest would say next. It was a rare moment when the usual laughter and applause were replaced by a quiet curiosity. People could feel that something important was unfolding. Even if it wasn't dramatic or loud, the host tried another approach, still light and friendly, but persistent. He asked about challenges in the guest's life, times when he had to make difficult choices or face uncertainty. He framed it in a way that anyone could relate to. Everyone faces moments when life seems complicated, when decisions feel heavy, and when the world expects too much. The guest nodded, acknowledging the question, but he didn't rush to answer. His calmness created a kind of tension, not uncomfortable, but compelling. The audience realized that this pause was part of the story, part of what made the moment so interesting. Finally, the guest spoke, choosing his words with care. He explained that some aspects of life, especially those that deal with personal beliefs, values, or faith, were meant to be private. He didn't criticize anyone for asking, and he didn't dismiss the curiosity. Instead, he gently reminded the host and the audience that some things are too personal to be shared publicly. The words were simple, natural, and respectful, but they carried weight. They made the room stop and listen, made the audience reflect, and even made the host pause for a moment. The host nodded, adjusting his tone slightly, showing respect for the guest's boundaries. He didn't push further, at least not directly. Instead, he shifted the conversation slightly, acknowledging the importance of privacy and personal choice. It was a subtle moment of understanding, a reminder that respect matters more than curiosity in some cases. The audience appreciated it too. People clapped softly, some murmuring in agreement. And the mood of the room shifted again, not back to laughter entirely, but to a sense of shared respect and understanding, even as the conversation continued with other topics. The previous moment lingered in everyone's minds. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sensational, but it was meaningful. It reminded people watching at home that celebrities, despite their fame and public image, are human beings with their own private lives and values. They have boundaries, and choosing to protect those boundaries is a sign of strength, not avoidance. The guest's calm presence continued to dominate the room in a subtle way. Every gesture, every nod, every small smile carried a quiet power. He didn't need to raise his voice, make dramatic statements, or create a scene to make an impression. His choice to remain respectful but private spoke volumes. The audience noticed it, and so did the host. For a few minutes, it felt less like a talk show and more like a lesson in dignity and human connection. The host, being skilled at reading the room, returned to lighter topics, asking about funny incidents on movie sets, behind-the-scenes stories, and memorable moments from the guest's career. The audience laughed, relaxed, and enjoyed the conversation again, but the earlier moment remained a quiet undercurrent. People could still feel the weight of what had just happened, and it gave the show a depth that many episodes didn't have. Throughout the rest of the interview, the guest maintained his calm, steady demeanor. He answered questions thoughtfully, never avoiding conversation entirely, but he always preserved the parts of himself that he valued most. The audience noticed this balance, how someone could be open and engaging without sacrificing personal integrity or privacy. It was a subtle but powerful lesson in self-respect and boundaries. Backstage, the production team also felt the impact of the conversation. Even those not visible on camera recognized that something different had occurred. There was a quiet energy, a sense that they had witnessed more than just an interview. They had witnessed a moment that reminded everyone of the importance of respect, patience, and understanding in human interactions. As the show ended, the audience clapped warmly, some standing, others whispering to each other about what they had seen. Clips of the moment would later circulate online, shared by fans who admired not just the guest's talent but his calm and respectful approach to questions that could have been uncomfortable. People online discussed it too, talking about how dignity and quiet strength often make a deeper impression than words spoken loudly or dramatically. In the days following, people reflected on the moment in different ways. Some discussed it in forums and social media posts, praising the guest's poise and wisdom. Others shared it with friends, noting how refreshing it was to see a celebrity maintain boundaries without conflict or tension. It became an example of how people could handle curiosity, questions, and pressure with grace. Even the host, later in interviews and social media posts, acknowledged that the guest's calm and respectful approach had made the show memorable in a new way. It wasn't just about the jokes, the movies, or the entertainment. It was about the human connection, the shared respect, and the quiet power of remaining true to oneself. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most important lessons come not from loud declarations but from measured, thoughtful responses. By the end of part 2 of this story, the audience and viewers at home had learned something subtle but powerful, that curiosity and respect can coexist, that personal boundaries matter, and that choosing not to share certain parts of life is not a weakness but a sign of wisdom. The show continued, the audience laughed again, and the lights remained bright, but the underlying message stayed with everyone. It was the kind of moment that lingers in memory, not for its drama, but for its quiet, human truth. After the thoughtful exchange from earlier, the room felt different. The laughter and jokes were still there, but they were softer, tempered with attention. The audience, both in the studio and at home, sensed that something significant had just occurred. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful in its subtlety. The quiet pause, the careful choice of words, and the calm presence of the guest had changed the energy in the room. People were no longer just waiting to hear jokes. They were waiting to see what would happen next. The host, ever the observer, noticed this shift. He had a natural ability to read the room, to feel the audience's mood, and to adjust the flow of conversation accordingly. He smiled and leaned forward slightly, keeping the conversation friendly, but there was a careful curiosity in his eyes. He asked the guest about how he approached his work, not just as an actor, but as someone constantly under the public eye. It was a question that could seem casual on the surface, but it carried an underlying depth. The audience knew it wasn't just about movies, it was about the person behind the fame. The guest listened carefully, tilting his head slightly and giving a small, thoughtful nod. He was someone who didn't rush his words. Each answer was deliberate, measured, and meaningful. He spoke about the importance of staying grounded in a world that often felt chaotic. He mentioned routines, small personal habits, and the people he trusted to remind him of who he was. Nothing he said was flashy or dramatic. Instead, it carried the weight of lived experience. The audience could feel that he wasn't just talking, he was sharing a glimpse of his inner world. The host, sensing an opportunity to explore a more human side, asked gently about moments when life became overwhelming, when pressure built up, and when it was tempting to hide behind humor or distractions. The question was framed lightly, but everyone could feel the weight behind it. The guest paused, taking a moment to consider his response. That pause was telling. It wasn't avoidance. It was reflection. The audience leaned in, silent now, captivated by the calm that radiated from him. When he finally spoke, his words were soft, deliberate, and clear. He talked about challenges that everyone could relate to, moments of doubt, times when expectations felt heavy, and the quiet struggle to balance personal life with public attention. But he didn't speak as someone complaining or seeking sympathy. Instead, he spoke with the calm authority of someone who had faced these moments many times and had learned to navigate them with care. His words carried an honesty that felt rare on a stage where humor often overshadowed depth. The host nodded appreciatively, clearly impressed with the thoughtful response. He asked a follow-up question about whether there were things in life that the guest found too personal to share publicly, things that shaped him but remained private. The audience held its breath, sensing that this could be the moment where the conversation either stayed superficial or became meaningful in a deeper way. The guest smiled lightly, acknowledging the curiosity, but his eyes reflected calm certainty. He explained that some aspects of life, especially the ones that define who a person is at their core, were meant to be kept private. He didn't say this defensively or angrily. He said it respectfully, almost conversationally, as if sharing a simple truth rather than making a statement. There was power in his calm delivery. He wasn't avoiding the question to hide anything. He was protecting a part of himself that was sacred, something that deserved respect rather than exposure. The audience, sensing the gravity of the moment, responded with a quiet, thoughtful applause. Not the usual loud cheer of a talk show, but a soft acknowledgement of respect for the guest's honesty. Even the host paused, adjusting his approach slightly, recognizing that pushing further could disrupt the balance that had been created. Instead, he leaned back, smiled, and guided the conversation back toward lighter topics. Though the quiet intensity of the earlier moment lingered in the room, this part of the conversation revealed a subtle truth. Sometimes, what isn't said can be just as meaningful as what is. The guest's calm demeanor and measured words demonstrated a kind of quiet strength that resonated with the audience. People realized that it takes courage to remain composed, to acknowledge curiosity without giving everything away, and to protect personal boundaries without creating conflict. It was a reminder that dignity often comes from restraint, not from shouting or overexposure. As the discussion moved forward, the host shared stories from the guests' career, funny anecdotes, surprising moments on set, and unexpected challenges faced during long shoots. The guest responded with small smiles and gentle laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from shared experiences rather than the need to entertain. The audience laughed along, enjoying the stories, but the tone remained layered. Beneath the humor was a clear sense of humanity, a glimpse of a life lived with careful thought and self-respect. During the next segment, the host gently nudged the conversation toward personal philosophy, asking how the guest stayed motivated and positive in a world that often seemed harsh or critical. The question was familiar to the audience. They had heard versions of it in many interviews, but the way it was asked, paired with the guest's quiet presence, made it feel fresh and significant. He spoke about small daily practices, the importance of trusted friends, and the lessons learned from failure and success alike. His words were accessible, not lofty or abstract, which made them relatable to anyone listening. The audience responded with nods, quiet murmurs of agreement, and smiles. People felt a connection, as though the guest was speaking directly to them, sharing insight that applied beyond Hollywood or celebrity life. He demonstrated that personal reflection, humility, and careful attention to life's details were not only traits of someone who had succeeded professionally, but traits that any person could admire and aspire to embody. Throughout this part of the conversation, the guest's calmness stood out. He did not try to impress or overwhelm. He did not need to dramatize or exaggerate. Instead, he allowed honesty and thoughtfulness to carry the moment. The audience responded in kind, engaged not just with his words but with the authenticity of his presence. Even small gestures, a nod, a thoughtful pause, a gentle smile spoke volumes. The host, recognizing the unique energy, asked a final question for this segment: whether the guest had learned lessons from the moments of silence, from choosing not to answer certain questions publicly. The guest nodded, explaining that silence often teaches more than words. Sometimes reflection and restraint lead to deeper understanding for oneself and for others. He emphasized that respecting boundaries, personal and professional, creates trust and strengthens connections. Even in public life, the audience clapped again, softly, with a mix of appreciation and contemplation. It wasn't the loud applause that followed a punchline or dramatic story. It was the quiet acknowledgement that something meaningful had been shared. People watching at home could feel the difference too. Clips of this moment would later circulate online, with viewers highlighting the way the guest handled a tricky situation with grace, calm, and honesty. By the end of this segment, the audience had not just learned about the guest's career or personal routines. They had witnessed an example of human dignity and composure in action. It was a reminder that public figures, despite their fame, are human. They have private spaces, personal values, and boundaries that deserve respect. And when those boundaries are respected, the connection between audience and guest becomes deeper and more authentic, even as the show continued, with lighter topics afterward. The energy in the room remained elevated, thoughtful, and engaged. People continued talking among themselves, quietly reflecting on the earlier discussion. The guests' calm and measured approach had left an impression that words alone couldn't fully capture. It was a moment that reminded everyone in the studio, and at home that strength often comes from quiet choices, from the ability to respond with calm and respect rather than reacting impulsively. By the time the cameras cut to a commercial break, the mood had shifted once more. The audience was still smiling, still laughing at the lighter moments, but underneath it all was a shared sense of having witnessed something rare. A moment where honesty, calm, and human connection shone brighter than jokes or flashy entertainment. It was a subtle, yet unforgettable, part of the show. The conversation had already taken a thoughtful turn, but no one in the studio realized just how intense the next moment would be. The host, known for his wit and charm, leaned in slightly, preparing to ask a question that many people had wondered about for years. It was a delicate topic, something personal, something private, something that most people would avoid asking directly. Yet the host, with his natural curiosity, framed it lightly, mixing humor with genuine interest, hoping to get an honest answer without making the guest uncomfortable. The audience immediately felt the tension. People shifted slightly in their seats, leaning forward, their eyes fixed on the stage. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath. The guest, who had been calm and measured throughout, paused for a moment, his expression composed but thoughtful. The camera zoomed in on him, capturing the subtle changes in his face, a slight lift of the eyebrow, a gentle nod, the way his eyes reflected quiet consideration. It was clear that this wasn't just another question to him, it was something meaningful. The host began gently, joking lightly as he asked about the role that belief or faith played in the guest's life. It was meant to be a casual question, something the audience might expect on a late-night show, but the way it was posed carried an undercurrent of expectation. The room went quiet, not tense exactly, but charged with anticipation. The audience sensed that the next few seconds could reveal something important, something beyond typical interviews. The guest listened. There was no rush, no need to answer immediately. His calm presence filled the room, and in that silence the audience felt the weight of the moment. It was as if everyone was waiting for him not to perform or entertain, but to simply be himself. That pause itself became powerful. It was a reminder that sometimes the most impactful moments come not from words alone, but from how someone holds themselves in stillness, in thought, and in quiet reflection. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and measured. He did not react with defensiveness, nor did he laugh off the question. Instead, he delivered a reply that was simple, honest, and profoundly human. He explained that some things in life beliefs, personal convictions, and private values are sacred to an individual. They are not meant to be discussed for entertainment or to satisfy curiosity. He made it clear that while he respected the interest, some aspects of his life are deeply personal and not for public debate. The audience was stunned, not in shock or confusion, but in awe of the way he handled the situation. It wasn't dramatic or confrontational. There was no tension or hostility. Instead, there was a sense of clarity and calm authority. He spoke in a way that conveyed respect for himself and for everyone listening. The room, filled with the usual hum of conversation and laughter, became still. Even the host, usually quick to respond, paused, caught off guard by the weight and honesty of the words. The silence stretched for a moment, yet it was not awkward. It was meaningful. People could feel the dignity in the answer. The guest had taken control of the conversation, not by arguing, not by raising his voice, but simply by speaking truthfully and with calm authority. He reminded everyone that personal boundaries are not weaknesses. They are a sign of respect for oneself and for others. The audience, the host, and the production team all were moved in a quiet, powerful way. The host, finally recovering from the pause, smiled and nodded. He didn't push further. Instead, he acknowledged the answer with genuine respect. There was a subtle shift in the energy of the room. Laughter returned, softer at first, mingling with applause and murmurs of approval. The audience, who had been leaning in with anticipation, now relaxed a little, but the moment lingered in the air. People at home watching the broadcast could feel the gravity of what had just happened. It was a reminder that honesty and dignity have an impact far greater than spectacle or drama. The guest continued with a calm demeanor, seamlessly returning to other topics without losing the intensity of the earlier moment. He shared stories from his career, behind-the-scenes anecdotes, and reflections on his personal journey, all in the same thoughtful, measured tone. But the audience could sense that something had changed. This was no longer just a talk show segment. It had become an example of how one can handle curiosity, pressure, and public attention with poise and integrity. Throughout the rest of the segment, the audience remained attentive. People laughed at the lighter moments, clapped at the funny stories, and nodded in understanding at the thoughtful remarks. Yet underneath it all was the quiet power of the guest's earlier statement. It wasn't about fame, it wasn't about proving a point, and it wasn't about conflict. It was about honesty, boundaries, and the strength to remain composed even when under pressure. The cameras captured every small gesture, the guest's calm hand movements, the gentle tilt of his head, the way he maintained eye contact without needing to dominate the conversation. Each movement reinforced the same message: confidence. Dignity and calm strength speak louder than words meant to entertain or provoke. The audience noticed it. The host noticed it. And most importantly, people watching from home noticed it, sharing clips online and discussing how rare it was to see such composure in a public setting. Backstage, the production team felt the impact as well. Even though they had seen many interviews, many moments of humor, drama, and celebrity spectacle, this felt different. There was a quiet energy, a sense of witnessing something rare, a moment where a person remained authentic, true to themselves, and respectful even in a setting designed for entertainment. It was a reminder that integrity does not have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful statements are those delivered calmly, with honesty and thoughtfulness. After the interview ended, the audience continued to applaud. It wasn't the loud, boisterous applause of excitement. It was a more reflective, appreciative response. People stood, clapped, and whispered to one another about what they had just seen. Clips of the moment circulated online, and viewers praised the guest's calm and respectful handling of a delicate question. Comments ranged from admiration of his composure to reflections on the importance of personal boundaries. It became a moment not just of entertainment, but of reflection and learning. The host later spoke about it in interviews, acknowledging that the guest's response had made the episode memorable in a new way. He praised the guest for handling the question with honesty, calm, and respect, qualities that go beyond celebrity and touch on universal human values. People discussed the exchange widely, noting that it was rare to see someone maintain dignity and composure in the face of curiosity and pressure, and that this kind of authenticity is inspiring. In the days that followed, fans and viewers reflected on the exchange, sharing their thoughts and lessons learned. They talked about how important it is to respect boundaries, to value privacy, and to recognize the quiet strength it takes to stand firm without conflict. The moment became a subtle but powerful example of human dignity in a public space. It showed that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's calm, quiet, and thoughtful, even long after the episode aired. The story lingered in the minds of the audience. People continued to talk about it not just as a celebrity interview, but as a lesson in personal strength and human connection. The guest's calm, honest, and respectful reply had stopped the show cold, but in doing so, it had also left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. It was a reminder that true influence comes from character, integrity, and the ability to navigate life's challenges with grace. By the end of this segment, the audience had not only been entertained, but they had also been reminded of an important human truth: that personal boundaries matter, that honesty matters, and that calm, respectful responses often speak louder than the most dramatic words. It was a moment that would remain in memory, not because it was loud or sensational, but because it was real, human, and deeply meaningful. The final part of the interview had ended, but the impact of the guest's calm and thoughtful response lingered in the air. The audience in the studio and viewers watching at home were still reflecting on what had just happened. It wasn't about laughter or dramatic revelations anymore. It was about honesty, boundaries, and human dignity. The quiet strength displayed by the guest had left everyone thinking. And even the usual chatter of a live audience had shifted into something more reflective. Backstage, the production team quietly discussed the episode. They had seen countless interviews over the years, with celebrity guests, dramatic stories, and funny anecdotes, but rarely had they experienced a moment that was so simple and yet so powerful. The guest's calm demeanor, the way he handled a delicate question, and the quiet authority of his words had created a ripple effect. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most memorable moments are not those filled with spectacle or drama, but those that show character, respect, and humanity. The host, who had initially framed the question with light humor and curiosity, reflected on what had just occurred. Normally, the energy of a talk show is lively and playful, but tonight had been different. He had expected entertainment, jokes, and stories, but he had been met with something deeper, a quiet, meaningful lesson about personal boundaries and integrity. The host later shared that it had been a reminder to him as well, that respect, thoughtfulness, and understanding are more valuable than pushing for answers or making a show out of someone's personal life. In the audience, both in the studio and at home, people talked quietly about what they had witnessed. They reflected on how calm and composed the guest had been, even under pressure. People shared clips on social media, praising the guest for handling a delicate topic with grace. Some commented that it was rare to see someone so famous maintain such dignity while staying true to themselves. Others reflected on their own lives, considering how they could handle challenging questions or situations with the same calm, respectful approach. It became clear that this was more than just a talk show moment. It was a lesson in human behavior, showing that honesty, respect, and patience often make a deeper impression than loud words or dramatic gestures. The guest's response reminded everyone that some things are sacred private parts of life that define who a person is, and that should be treated with care. It was not about hiding or being mysterious. It was about knowing one's values, protecting what matters, and responding thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Over the next few days, viewers and fans discussed the episode widely. Many highlighted how refreshing it was to see a celebrity handle a personal topic without drama or conflict. People admired the guest's courage to remain calm and respectful, even when pressed for an answer that could have been uncomfortable. It sparked conversations about personal boundaries, privacy, and the importance of staying true to oneself. For some, it even became a source of inspiration for how they wanted to conduct themselves. In difficult situations, the guest himself did not seek attention for the moment. He didn't make statements about it, and he didn't post anything on social media. Yet his calm response continued to resonate with people, proving that authenticity often speaks louder than words or self-promotion. It reminded everyone watching that true influence does not come from trying to impress others, but from living with integrity, being thoughtful, and respecting both oneself and others. Even the host, who was used to being the center of attention and guiding the conversation, admitted later that the guest's response had made the episode unforgettable. He had learned an important lesson about human interaction, that sometimes the most profound moments happen in silence or through carefully chosen words. The balance between curiosity and respect, between humor and seriousness, was delicate, but the guest had shown that it could be navigated with grace. In classrooms, discussion forums, and online communities, people began analyzing the episode. They spoke not about the fame of the guest or the celebrity culture, but about the way a single individual demonstrated calm strength and personal integrity. They discussed how these qualities are universally admirable, whether in celebrities, colleagues, friends, or family. The episode became an example of how one person's careful, Thoughtful response can influence and inspire many others. The audience's reaction also revealed something profound. Admiration does not require dramatics. People felt a deep respect for the guest because he handled a delicate moment with patience and composure. He did not react defensively, make excuses, or retreat. Instead, he answered honestly, maintained boundaries, and showed respect for everyone in the room. That combination of honesty, calmness, and dignity left a lasting impression that went far beyond the usual entertainment value of a talk show. For many viewers, the episode became a quiet reminder of how they wanted to approach their own lives. People reflected on moments when they had been pressured to answer questions they weren't ready for, or when they had felt compelled to reveal more than they wanted. Seeing someone handle a similar situation with grace inspired them to consider how they could act with patience, honesty, and respect in their own experiences. It was a universal lesson about human interaction, one that transcended the context of the interview itself. Even long after the episode aired, the ripple effect continued. Online, clips were shared and discussed, highlighting the guest's calm and thoughtful words. People praised him for not only managing a delicate moment but also for setting an example of maturity and self-respect. Comments emphasized that respect for personal boundaries is a lesson everyone can benefit from, regardless of fame, status, or occupation. The interview also left a mark on those who were present in the studio. Production staff, camera operators, and everyone working behind the scenes spoke about the guest's poise and calm demeanor. They noticed how effortlessly he balanced honesty with discretion, how he respected the curiosity of the audience without compromising his own principles. It was a reminder that leadership, influence, and strength often come quietly. In the choices people make every day. By the end of the show, the audience left not just entertained but enlightened. They had witnessed a moment of human connection, integrity, and quiet strength. Laughter and applause were part of the experience, but so were reflection, understanding, and admiration. The episode had shown that one person's calm and respectful approach could change the tone of an entire room and leave a lasting impact on thousands of viewers. For those watching at home, the lesson was clear. It is possible to be kind, honest, and true to oneself even when faced with pressure. It is possible to navigate curiosity and questions with patience and dignity. And most importantly, it is possible to influence others positively, not through loud or dramatic actions, but through calm, thoughtful, and respectful behavior. The guest's response had done more than stop the show cold. It had created a moment of reflection for everyone involved. It reminded viewers that real courage is often quiet, that integrity is more powerful than spectacle, and that respecting oneself and others leaves a deeper impression than any performance ever could. As the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, the audience continued to reflect on the moment. It had been a subtle yet unforgettable lesson about life, respect, and the quiet power of calm honesty. Clips of the interview continued to circulate, inspiring conversations about personal boundaries, dignity, and the importance of thoughtful responses. The guest's calm, honest approach had left a lasting impression, proving that influence does not come from spectacle, but from character, integrity, and respect for oneself and others. In the end, the story of this interview became more than just a celebrity moment. It became an example of human values in action, a reminder that calm, honesty, and respect can create a lasting impact on the world. People remembered not the jokes, not the glamour, but the quiet strength of someone who stood firm in their principles, answered with dignity, and inspired everyone watching to reflect on their own lives. It was a lesson that would endure long after the applause faded. A story about the power of calm, thoughtful words, the importance of boundaries, and the subtle yet profound influence of human integrity. The interview had achieved something rare. It had entertained, inspired, and reminded people of what truly matters, all in a single, memorable moment.